Samuel Johnson's Preface to Shakespeare, written in 1765, is a seminal piece of literary criticism that offers insights into both William Shakespeare's works and Johnson's own views on literature. Here are some key points from the preface. Defense of Shakespeare. Johnson defends Shakespeare against criticisms that his works lack the classical structure and decorum of the plays by the ancient Greeks and Romans. He argues that Shakespeare's genius lies in his ability to portray human nature in its complexity and variety. Critique of critics. Johnson critiques previous critics who have attempted to impose rigid classical standards on Shakespeare. He asserts that Shakespeare should be judged on his own terms, and his works should be appreciated for their naturalness and originality. Shakespeare's strengths. Johnson praises Shakespeare for his vivid characterization and his ability to depict real human emotions and situations. He highlights Shakespeare's skill in capturing the intricacies of human behavior and his use of language. Historical and cultural context. Johnson acknowledges that Shakespeare's plays reflect the customs and manners of his time, and he emphasizes the importance of understanding the historical and cultural context to fully appreciate Shakespeare's work. Literary theory. Johnson discusses the nature of dramatic art and the role of the playwright. He reflects on the differences between Shakespeare's approach and the more formalized approaches of classical playwrights, suggesting that Shakespeare's approach is more natural and human. Shakespeare's influence. Johnson notes Shakespeare's significant influence on English literature and the enduring appeal of his works. He considers Shakespeare a central figure in the literary canon, whose contributions have shaped the development of English drama. The preface to Shakespeare remains a critical reference for understanding Shakespeare's place in literary history and continues to be studied for its insights into early modern criticism and Shakespearean scholarship. Here's a simplified summary of the main arguments in Samuel Johnson's Preface to Shakespeare, with examples to illustrate each point. Defense of Shakespeare against classical criticism. Argument. Johnson defends Shakespeare from critics who say his plays don't follow classical rules like those of Greek and Roman drama. Example. Shakespeare's plays often have complex plots and characters that don't fit neatly into classical structures. For instance, in Macbeth, the plot is driven by supernatural elements and internal conflict rather than a strict adherence to classical unity. Critique of previous critics. Argument. Johnson criticizes earlier critics who tried to impose rigid rules on Shakespeare's work. Example. Some critics thought Shakespeare's plays were too loose and didn't follow the three unities action, time, place as classical plays did. Johnson argues that Shakespeare's strength is in his ability to capture real human experience, not in adhering to these rules. Shakespeare's strengths in characterization. Argument. Johnson praises Shakespeare for his deep and realistic portrayal of characters. Example. In Hamlet, Shakespeare explores complex emotions and psychological depth, such as Hamlet's existential doubt and internal conflict, making him a richly developed character. Historical and cultural context. Argument. Johnson notes that Shakespeare's plays reflect the customs and values of his time, and understanding this context is crucial to appreciating his work. Example. The themes of kingship and legitimacy in King Lear are deeply connected to the political context of Elizabethan England, reflecting concerns about authority and succession. Nature of dramatic art. Argument. Johnson reflects on the nature of drama, praising Shakespeare's natural and human portrayal over classical formalism. Example. Shakespeare's use of everyday language and relatable situations in plays like A Midsummer Night's Dream contrasts with the more formal, stylized language and scenarios of classical drama. Shakespeare's influence. Argument. Johnson acknowledges Shakespeare's lasting impact on English literature and his enduring popularity. Example. Shakespeare's innovative use of language and themes has influenced countless writers and playwrights. For instance, his exploration of ambition and power in Macbeth has been echoed in many subsequent works. These arguments collectively emphasize Shakespeare's unique contribution to literature and his value as a writer who transcends classical constraints. Important concepts in Samuel Johnson's Preface to Shakespeare. Naturalness over classical rules. Johnson champions the idea that Shakespeare's genius lies in his natural representation of human nature, rather than adherence to classical rules of drama. He believes that Shakespeare's works are more about the genuine portrayal of life and emotions than fitting into rigid classical structures. Complexity of human nature. Johnson highlights Shakespeare's ability to depict the complexity of human nature. He argues that Shakespeare's characters are deeply realistic and multidimensional, which adds to the richness of his plays. Critique of classical criticism. Johnson critiques earlier critics who apply classical standards to Shakespeare's work, suggesting that such an approach is misguided. He believes Shakespeare should be appreciated on his own terms, not judged by the constraints of classical theory. Historical and cultural context. Johnson emphasizes that understanding the historical and cultural context of Shakespeare's time is essential for fully appreciating his works. He argues that Shakespeare's plays are a reflection of the social and political climate of Elizabethan England. The role of the critic. Johnson himself acts as a critic who seeks to provide a balanced view of Shakespeare's work. He acknowledges both strengths and weaknesses, aiming to provide a fair assessment of Shakespeare's contribution to literature. Johnson as a critic. Balanced approach. Johnson is known for his balanced approach to literary criticism. In his preface to Shakespeare, he provides a nuanced view, acknowledging both the merits and limitations of Shakespeare's work. He does not simply praise Shakespeare uncritically but offers thoughtful commentary on his strengths and flaws. Focus on character and nature. As a critic, Johnson places significant emphasis on character development and the portrayal of nature. He values Shakespeare's ability to create realistic and relatable characters, and his focus is on how well these characters represent human nature and emotions. Rejection of overly rigid criticism. Johnson rejects the application of rigid classical standards to Shakespeare's work. He argues that such standards are not suitable for evaluating Shakespeare, whose work reflects a different set of artistic and cultural norms. Historical insight. Johnson's criticism is informed by an understanding of historical and cultural contexts. He provides insights into how the socio-political environment of Shakespeare's time influences his plays, demonstrating a broader understanding of literature as part of its historical setting. Influence on literary criticism. Johnson's preface to Shakespeare had a lasting influence on literary criticism. His approach to evaluating Shakespeare's work, focusing on naturalness and character, helped shape subsequent literary analysis and set a precedent for how to approach literary evaluation beyond classical norms. Overall, Johnson's critical work is notable for its thoughtful and contextually aware approach to literature, offering valuable perspectives on Shakespeare's contributions and challenging the imposition of classical constraints on literary evaluation.